If you ever work a fire tower in the Smokies and you hear your own voice calling up from the trees, don't answer it. And whatever you do, don't go down to investigate. I learned that lesson the hard way back in the summer of 2006 when I took a seasonal job with the Tennessee Division of Forestry. I was 23 years old, fresh out of the University of Tennessee with a forestry degree and about $60,000 in student debt hanging over my head. The job didn't pay much, maybe $12 an hour, but it came with free housing, and I figured a summer alone in the mountains would give me time to think about what I actually wanted to do with my life. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, thought I was crazy. She wanted me to take an office job with the Parks Department in Knoxville, something with benefits and a retirement plan. But I'd spent 4 years in classrooms and libraries, and the idea of trading that for a cubicle made me want to scream. So when the forestry job came up, I took it over her objections. We broke up 2 days before I left for the mountains. She said I was running away from responsibility. Maybe she was right. The tower they assigned me to was called Cove Mountain Lookout, situated about 8 miles outside of Townsend on a fire road so rough it took me 45 minutes to drive what should have been a 15-minute trip. My supervisor, a man named Jerry Watkins, met me at the ranger station to give me the orientation. Jerry was maybe 55, with the kind of weathered face you get from spending decades outdoors. He'd been with the Division of Forestry since the early 80s and knew these mountains better than anyone. "You ever been in a fire tower before?" he asked, loading supplies into the back of my truck. I told him I hadn't, that my experience was mostly academic, field studies, data collection, that kind of thing. Jerry nodded slowly, like he was sizing me up. "It's different up there. Real different. Some people love it, some people can't handle it at all." I asked what he meant by that. "The isolation," he said. "No phone service, no internet, no other people for days at a time. Just you and the forest and your thoughts. Some folks find that peaceful. Others." He trailed off, shaking his head. I asked if that's what happened to the previous lookout, the one I was replacing. Jerry's expression darkened. "Tyler quit about 2 weeks into the season. Wouldn't say why exactly, just that he needed to leave. Seemed real shaken up about something." He looked at me carefully. "You start feeling like that, like you need to get out, you call me on the radio. Don't just leave. We need to know you're okay." The tower itself was a 70-foot steel structure built back in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. It was all rusted girders and peeling paint, with a small cabin at the top barely big enough to turn around in. Jerry helped me carry supplies up the stairs: food, water, propane for the stove, batteries for the radio and flashlight. With each trip up those metal steps, I could feel the whole structure swaying slightly in the wind. The cabin was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with windows on all four sides giving a 360-degree view of the surrounding forest. There was a narrow cot in one corner, a potbelly stove in another, and an Osborne firefinder in the center, a circular table with a detailed map of the area and a sighting device for pinpointing smoke. A two-way radio was mounted on the wall, along with a clipboard for logging observations. That was it. No electricity, no running water, no bathroom beyond an outhouse at the base of the tower. "Radio check every morning at 0700, Jerry said, showing me how to work the equipment. "Every evening at 1800. You miss 2 checks in a row, we send someone to make sure you're alive, otherwise you're on your own up here." After Jerry left, I spent the rest of that first afternoon getting settled. I cleaned the windows with some rags and vinegar, swept out the mouse droppings, arranged my supplies. When the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I understood why someone might want this job. The view was incredible. Layer after layer of forested ridges fading into blue distance, with no sign of human presence anywhere except the fire road far below. That first week passed in a kind of peaceful monotony. I'd wake up with the sunrise, make coffee on my camp stove, do the morning radio check with Jerry. Then I'd spend the day scanning the horizon with binoculars, reading books I'd brought, writing in a journal. The work itself was simple: watch for smoke, record weather conditions, report anything unusual. Most days, nothing happened at all. The isolation didn't bother me the way Jerry had warned it might. In fact, I found it therapeutic. After 4 years of constant noise, roommates, parties, traffic, the general chaos of campus life, the silence felt like a gift. I'd sit on the catwalk outside the cabin and just listen to the forest. Wind in the trees, birds calling, the distant sound of a creek somewhere down in the valley. But on the eighth night, something changed. I had just finished my evening radio check with Jerry, logged the day's observations, and was heating up a can of beef stew on the camp stove when I heard it. A voice calling up from the base of the tower. Hey, hey, you up there. It sounded distant and muffled, but clear enough that I could make out the words. I set down my stew and went to the window, looking down into the gathering darkness. The sun had set maybe 15 minutes earlier, and the forest below was already deep in shadow. I couldn't see anyone near the base of the tower. I figured it was probably a hiker who'd gotten lost and needed directions. It happened sometimes, Jerry had told me. People would wander off the marked trails and end up confused as darkness fell. The tower was visible from miles away, so lost hikers would sometimes make their way to it looking for help. I opened the cabin door and called down, Yeah, I'm here. You need help? There was a pause, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then the voice came again. Can you come down here? I can't climb up. Something about the request struck me as odd. The stairs were clearly visible, and there was no reason a reasonably fit person couldn't make the climb, but maybe they were injured or elderly. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the metal steps, my boots clanging on the grating with each step. I was about halfway down, maybe 35 feet up, when I heard the voice again. And that's when the wrongness of it really hit me, because the voice wasn't coming from below anymore. It was coming from above, from the cabin, and it was my voice. Can you come down here? It called, using my exact inflection, my exact tone, even the slight Tennessee accent I'd picked up from my dad. I can't climb up. I froze on the stairs, one hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles went white. My heart started hammering in my chest as I looked up at the cabin. The door was still open, exactly as I'd left it. I could see the lantern light spilling out, but I couldn't see anyone inside. Then I looked down, sweeping my flashlight beam across the ground at the base of the tower, and in that circle of light, I saw something moving through the trees. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and it moved wrong. Not walking exactly, more like gliding between the trunks, its movements too fluid and too fast. I didn't think. I just turned and hauled myself back up those stairs as fast as I could, taking them two at a time, the whole tower shaking under me. When I got back to the cabin, I slammed the door and threw the bolt, then checked every corner with my flashlight. Empty. I was alone. But from down below, I could still hear my voice calling up. Hey, hey, you up there. Can you come down here? I can't climb up. The same three phrases, over and over, in my exact voice. I stood at the window and looked down, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows and that voice that shouldn't exist. It went on for hours. The same three phrases, cycling endlessly, sometimes with short pauses between them, sometimes running together almost like a conversation with myself. I sat on the cot with my flashlight in one hand and my camp knife in the other, listening to that thing wear my voice like a mask. Around midnight, it stopped. The forest went completely silent, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I sat there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat, wondering if it was over. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate steps, metal clanging under weight, coming up toward the cabin. I pointed my flashlight at the door, watching the bolt, waiting to see if it would try to get in. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I could hear breathing now, just on the other side of the door. Deep, wet breathing that sounded wrong somehow, like lungs that weren't shaped quite right. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just sat there, gripping that knife, watching the door. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps started again, descending this time, back down the stairs, fading into the distance. When I couldn't hear them anymore, I got up and looked out the window. Nothing, just darkness and trees. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the cot with every light I had turned on, watching the windows, listening for any sound. When dawn finally came, the relief I felt was almost physical. I did my morning radio check with Jerry at 0700 sharp. He asked how my night was, and I almost told him, almost explained what had happened, but something stopped me. I kept thinking about what he'd said about Tyler, the previous lookout, how he'd quit after 2 weeks because he couldn't handle something. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to give up on my 8th day. So I told Jerry everything was fine, just fine, and I'd see him at the 2-week supply drop. The next few days were normal. No voices, no movement in the trees, no footsteps on the stairs. I started to convince myself that I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. Maybe the isolation was getting to me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The mind can play tricks in the dark, I told myself, especially when you're alone. But then, on the 12th night, it happened again. I was ready this time. I had made a rule for myself, no going down after dark, no matter what I heard. So when my voice started calling up from the trees just after sunset, I locked the door, pulled the curtains over the windows, and tried to ignore it. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't just repeating those same 3 phrases. I know you can hear me, it called, and the words were so perfectly me that it made my skin crawl. Even the slight pause before "here," the way I always hesitate just a fraction of a second when I'm trying to be emphatic. I saw you looking. I know you're scared. I turned off my lantern and sat in the dark, trying to control my breathing. My hands were shaking. That's okay, the voice continued, and now it sounded almost sympathetic, almost kind. You should be scared, but I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk. I've been so lonely out here. It went on like that for hours, sometimes pleading, asking me to come down so we could talk face to face, sometimes threatening, saying it knew where I lived, knew about Sarah, knew things it shouldn't know. Sometimes just talking about nothing at all, the weather, the trees, the stars. A one-sided conversation with myself, echoing up from the darkness. Around 11, the voice changed tactics. It started playing sounds. First it was Jerry's voice, gruff and urgent. Son, you need to come down right now. We've got an emergency. There's a fire on the North Ridge, and we need you to evacuate. I almost fell for it. Almost. My hand was on the door bolt before I stopped myself. Jerry would never ask me to evacuate without using the radio first. This wasn't real. Then it was my mom's voice, crying, Sweetie, please, I need you to come home. Your father's in the hospital. He had a heart attack. Please, come home. My mom's voice was perfect. The little hitch in her breath when she cries, the way she calls me sweetie even though I'm 23 years old. I had to bite my lip to keep from responding. Then it was Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I miss you so much. Please come down so we can talk. I drove all the way out here to find you. That one hurt, because part of me wanted it to be real, wanted Sarah to have changed her mind, wanted that relationship back, but I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. The thing cycled through everyone I'd ever known, everyone I'd ever cared about. My dad, saying he was proud of me. My college roommate, asking if I wanted to grab a beer. My high school best friend, telling me he'd gotten lost in the woods and needed help finding his way out. Each one was perfect. Perfect voices, perfect inflections, perfect knowledge of who these people were to me. And each one was asking me to come down. I held firm. I stayed in the cabin, hands over my ears sometimes, trying to block it out. When dawn came, the voice stopped. The forest went quiet again. I noticed something new that morning. There were scratches on the door, long, deep gouges in the wood that definitely hadn't been there before. And on the stairs, about halfway up, there were marks on the metal, scored grooves, like something with claws had gripped the railing. That's when I started going through the old logbooks. The tower had a small shelf of supplies and documentation, including fire logs dating back decades. Most of them were routine dates, weather conditions, smoke sightings, that kind of thing. But buried in a log from 1968, I found an entry that made my blood run cold. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but I could make out most of it. August 15th, 1968. Something in the woods. Been hearing voices for 3 nights now. My voice, my wife's voice, my kids. It knows things. It knows us. Jay. Harrison went down to investigate on night 2. Never came back. Searched for him at dawn. Found his flashlight at base of tower. Nothing else. Closing tower for season. Do not staff until reviewed. There were other entries scattered through the years, in different handwriting, from different lookouts. A note from 1973. Voices stopped on night 5. Don't know what it wants. Don't know if it left or if it's waiting. From 1987. Called supervisor about the voices. He said, previous lookout, reported same thing. Told me to stick it out. I can't. I'm leaving tomorrow. From 2001. It tried the door last night. I could hear it breathing. If anyone reads this, don't go down after dark. Whatever it is, it can't come up if you stay inside. The most recent entry was from this year. Tyler's handwriting, dated just 3 weeks ago. Can't do this anymore. It knows too much. It's using my sister's voice, and she's been dead for 2 years. How does it know? How does it know what she sounded like? I'm getting out. I sat there in the growing daylight, reading these entries over and over. Different people, different years, but the same basic story. Something lived in these woods. Something that could copy voices, that knew things about people it shouldn't know, and it wanted people to come down from the tower. The question was why? I thought about quitting. I really did. I could pack up right then, drive down to the ranger station, tell Jerry I couldn't handle it. But I'd already been there almost 2 weeks, and I only had 10 more to go. The pay was good. I was making almost $1,500 for the summer, which was a lot for a broke recent graduate. And part of me, the stubborn part, didn't want to give up, didn't want to let this thing, whatever it was, chase me away. So I made another set of rules. No going down after dark, obviously. Keep the door locked and the curtains closed after sunset. Don't respond to any voices, no matter how convincing. And most importantly, don't engage with it. Don't try to communicate. Don't try to understand it. Just wait it out. The thing tested me every night after that. It cycled through everyone I'd ever known, everyone I'd ever cared about. It found my weaknesses and exploited them. When it used my dad's voice to tell me he was proud of me, I cried. When it used Sarah's voice to say she still loved me, I had to grip the edge of the cot to keep from running down those stairs. The worst was when it started having conversations with itself. I'd hear my voice talking to Sarah's voice, having the kind of intimate conversation we used to have late at night, or my voice talking to Jerry's voice, discussing fire conditions and weather patterns. It would create these little scenes, these windows into a normal life, and play them for me like it was trying to remind me of what I was missing. Some nights, it would just talk about loneliness, how long it had been alone, how much it wanted company, how it just needed someone to talk to for a little while. Those nights were almost worse than the threatening ones, because the loneliness in those words felt real, felt genuine. But I held firm. I stayed in the cabin, did my radio checks, scanned for fires, and counted down the days. Then, on my 21st night, something changed. I was doing my evening radio check when Jerry's voice came through with an unusual request. Hey, need you to come down to the fire road tonight. Got a supply drop that can't wait till morning. I stared at the radio, my hand hovering over the transmit button. Jerry had never asked me to come down at night before. Never. In fact, during my orientation, he'd specifically told me that all supply drops would be done during daylight hours only. It was one of his rules. Say again, I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. Supply drop, Jerry's voice repeated, coming through the speaker with perfect clarity. At the fire road, around 2100 hours. Bringing some fresh food, batteries. Thought you might appreciate it. I looked at my watch. 2100 hours was 2 hours away, 9 p.m. Jerry, I said carefully, what's the emergency? Why can't this wait till the scheduled drop tomorrow? There was a long pause. The static on the line seemed to grow louder, and I could have sworn I heard something underneath it. Something like breathing. Just need you to come down, son, Jerry's voice said finally. Won't take but a minute. I'll meet you at the fire road. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I clicked off the radio without responding and sat there in the gathering darkness, my mind racing. There was no way to know for sure if that was really Jerry or just the thing imitating him over the radio somehow. But I also couldn't risk ignoring a real emergency. What if Jerry really did need me to come down? What if there was a fire situation developing and he needed to evacuate me? I decided to compromise. I'd go down to the fire road, but I'd do it on my terms. I waited until 21:30, a full half hour after the supposed drop time. If it was real, Jerry would still be there waiting, probably annoyed but still there. If it wasn't, well, maybe the thing would have given up by then. I grabbed my flashlight, my knife, and the can of bear spray Jerry had given me during orientation. Then I made the climb down slowly, testing each step, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every sound made me jump: the creak of metal, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a barred owl. When I reached the bottom, I swept my light around the clearing at the base of the tower. Nothing. No Jerry, no supply drop, no vehicle. Just the forest and the darkness and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. But there were footprints in the soft dirt near the base of the tower. I crouched down, examining them with my flashlight. They were big, bigger than any humans, maybe 14 or 15 inches long, and they were deep, pressed into the earth like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. The prints led from the tree line to the base of the tower, circled around the structure, and then headed back into the forest. I followed them with my light and saw where something had tried to pry open the door to the equipment shed. The metal frame was bent, and there were scratches in the paint that looked fresh. I heard a sound behind me and spun around, my flashlight beam landing on a figure standing just at the edge of the trees. For a moment, just a moment, I thought it was a person. It was roughly human-shaped, maybe 6.5 feet tall, standing upright, but as my light hit it fully, I could see the wrongness. The proportions were off. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be. The head sat on the shoulders at an odd angle, cocked slightly to one side like a dog hearing a strange sound. And the face. The face looked like someone had tried to sculpt a human face from memory, but had gotten all the details slightly wrong. The eyes were too far apart, set wide on either side of the head. The mouth was too wide, stretching almost from ear to ear. The nose was just a suggestion, 2 holes in the center of the face. When it spoke, it used my voice again. Why won't you talk to me? I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up with fear, and all I could do was back slowly toward the stairs, keeping my light on the thing. I've been so lonely, it said, and there was something genuinely mournful in the tone. Something that almost sounded human. I just want someone to talk to, just for a little while. Is that so much to ask? I reached the stairs and started climbing backward, never taking my eyes off it. The thing moved closer, now standing directly under the tower, looking up at me with those wrong-spaced eyes. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see its skin. It looked like bark or leather, rough and textured, mottled with patches of different colors. Please, it said, and this time it used my mom's voice, the perfect imitation of her voice when she's pleading with me about something. Please don't leave me alone. I need you. I kept climbing. My legs were shaking so badly I almost lost my footing twice, but I kept going. The thing followed, staying directly below me, matching my pace. When I was about halfway up, it reached out one of those two long arms and touched the tower structure. I heard metal groan under its grip. I could make you come down, it said in my voice. I could shake this whole tower until you fell, but I don't want to hurt you. I just want you to choose to come down, to talk to me willingly. I didn't respond. I just kept climbing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached the cabin, I practically threw myself inside and slammed the door, throwing both the bolt and a chair under the handle for good measure. From below, I could hear it moving around the base of the tower. I could hear it breathing, that wet, wrong sound, and I could hear it talking, cycling through voices again. My family, my friends, Sarah, all of them asking me to come down, promising it would be okay, promising they just wanted to talk. It went on all night. The thing stayed there, circling the tower, talking in stolen voices, and I stayed in the cabin, every light on, every weapon within reach, counting the hours until dawn. When the sun finally came up, the voices stopped. I heard the thing move away, back into the forest, and then there was silence. I made my morning radio check with Jerry at 0700, and this time I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice. You okay up there? Jerry asked immediately, picking up on my tone. I asked him if he'd tried to radio me last night about a supply drop. There was a long pause. No, he said slowly. Supply drop scheduled for this afternoon, same as planned. Why? Did someone contact you? I told him it was nothing, just checking. But after I signed off, I started packing my things. I was done. I'd made it 3 weeks, which was longer than Tyler had managed. But I was done. Whatever that thing was, whatever it wanted, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I packed everything essential into my backpack, my wallet, my keys, my phone, some food and water. I left everything else, clothes, books, camping gear. I'd buy new stuff. None of it was worth staying here another night. But before I left, I found something tucked into one of the old fire logs. It was a note written in the same shaky handwriting as that entry from 1968. It's older than the trees, older than the mountains. It doesn't want to hurt us. It just wants company. But the ones who go down don't come back the same, if they come back at all. Don't be fooled by the voices. Don't be fooled by the sadness. It's not human, and it doesn't think like we do. What it calls talking isn't talking. What it calls company isn't company. Jay Harrison went down. I saw what came back 3 days later. It looked like Harrison. It sounded like Harrison. But it wasn't Harrison. It was wearing him like a suit. Don't go down. Whatever you do, don't go down. I left that note where I found it, figuring the next lookout might need the warning. Then I started down the stairs for the last time, moving quickly, my pack heavy on my shoulders. The thing was waiting at the bottom. It stood there in the morning light, and somehow it looked even worse in daylight than it had in darkness. The sun showed every wrong detail, the way its skin moved like it wasn't quite attached properly, the way its joints bent in directions human joints shouldn't bend, the way its eyes didn't blink or water or do any of the things eyes should do. You're leaving, it said in my voice. Not a question, a statement. I didn't answer. I just started walking toward my truck, giving it a wide berth, my hand on the bear spray in my pocket. That's okay, it said. I understand. But you'll be back. They always come back. Or someone else will come. Someone always comes. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I never went back to Cove Mountain after that summer. I got a job with the National Park Service instead, working in visitor education at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I'm around people all day, every day, and I never have to spend a night alone in the woods. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear my own voice calling to me from the dark spaces, from the closet, from under the bed, from just outside the window. And I remember that thing telling me they always come back. I haven't gone back, and I never will. But sometimes I wonder about the next person who took that job at Cove Mountain Lookout. I wonder if they heard the voices. I wonder if they read those old log entries. I wonder if they stayed in the cabin like they were supposed to. And I wonder if they made it out. There are places in the old mines where the maps stop making sense, where tunnels end up where they shouldn't, and the air tastes like copper. If you ever find yourself in one of those places, you turn around and you mark it as unsafe. You don't investigate. You don't go deeper. I'm telling you this because I didn't follow that rule, and it cost me something I'll never get back. This was in the spring of 2012 down in Harlan County, Kentucky. If you know anything about Eastern Kentucky, you know Harlan County means coal. The whole economy was built on it, entire towns springing up around mine entrances, generations of families working underground, fortunes made and lost based on the price per ton. By 2012, most of the big operations had shut down. The easy coal was gone, the companies had moved on, and what was left were these abandoned mines scattered through the mountains like old scars. I was working for a company called Appalachian Reclamation Services, which is a fancy way of saying we went into abandoned mines and made sure they weren't going to collapse under someone's backyard or poison the local creek with acid mine drainage. The work was steady and the pay was decent, about 70,000 a year plus hazard bonuses. And for a guy like me with just a high school diploma and a mining certificate from Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College, that was about as good as it was going to get. I'd been doing reclamation work for about 5 years at that point. Started right out of high school when my dad, who'd worked underground for 32 years before black lung forced him into retirement, pulled some strings to get me the job. He didn't want me mining active operations, said he'd spent 3 decades breathing coal dust, and he'd be damned if his son did the same. But reclamation was different. It was safer, cleaner, and the mines we surveyed had been dead for years. Nothing down there but old equipment and stale air. Or so I thought. The mine they sent us to was called Black Seam Number 7, which had been closed down since 1986 after the company that owned it went bankrupt. It sat about 3 miles outside of Harlan proper, dug into the side of a mountain called Preacher's Ridge. According to the records, it went down about 800 feet in a series of declining slopes and vertical shafts, with maybe 10 miles of total tunnel length spread across 3 main levels. Our job was to survey the main tunnels, check the support structures, test air quality, and recommend whether it needed to be properly sealed or if it could just be left as is with warning signs. Standard work. We'd done probably 50 similar surveys over the years. There were 3 of us on the team. Me, a guy named Ray Holbrook, who'd been mining since before I was born, and our supervisor, a woman named Angela Price, who had a degree in geological engineering from Virginia Tech and didn't take crap from anyone. Angela ran a tight operation, safety checks every hour, air quality monitors at all times, a strict buddy system that meant nobody went anywhere alone. She'd seen too many accidents over the years to cut corners. Ray was my favorite to work with. He was maybe 65, completely bald, with hands like slabs of granite and a slow, careful way of moving that came from decades of working in spaces that could kill you if you weren't paying attention. He'd started mining at 16, same as his father and grandfather before him. He knew these mountains, knew coal, knew the hundreds of little signs that told you whether a tunnel was stable or about to come down on your head. We started the survey on a Monday morning in late April, when the dogwoods were just starting to bloom and the mornings still had that crisp mountain chill to them. The entrance to Black Seam Number 7 was boarded up and posted with warning signs, danger, Abandoned mine. Do not enter. Deadly gases present, but we had permission from the property owner and the state mining board. So we pried off the boards and set up our equipment just inside the entrance. The mouth of the mine was maybe 12 feet high and 15 feet wide, carved straight into the mountainside. The ground in front of it was littered with old equipment, rusted rail tracks, the remains of a conveyor system, a collapsed equipment shed that had probably held tools and supplies back in the day. Everything was covered in kudzu and Virginia creeper, nature slowly reclaiming what had been taken from it. Inside, the tunnel was dark and cold, the temperature dropping noticeably as we moved away from the entrance. Our headlamps cut through the blackness, illuminating support timbers and coal seams and the occasional piece of abandoned equipment. The air smelled like damp stone and old timber, with an underlying metallic tang that Ray said came from groundwater seeping through iron-rich rock. The first day went fine. We made it about 300 feet into the main tunnel, documenting everything with photos, measurements, and air quality readings. The supports looked solid enough. Most of them were steel I-beams installed in the 70s when the mine was upgraded, though there were a few sections where we noted potential collapse risks. We marked those areas with orange tape and flagged them for closer inspection. We worked methodically, moving slowly, checking everything twice. Angela had a saying, "Fast gets you killed, slow gets you home." We'd work for 50 minutes, then take a 10-minute break to rest and check our equipment. Every hour, on the hour, Angela would radio our position to the surface team, a couple of guys who stayed at the mine entrance to monitor communications and provide backup if something went wrong. The second day is when we found the discrepancy. We were about 500 feet into the main tunnel, checking our maps against the actual tunnel layout, when Angela stopped and frowned at her clipboard. "That's odd," she said, shining her headlamp at the tunnel ahead. Ray and I moved up beside her. "What's odd?" I asked. She showed us the survey map from 1985, the last official documentation of the mine before it closed. According to the map, the main tunnel should have ended in a T intersection about 50 feet ahead, with passages branching left and right to different work areas. But when we reached the point where the intersection should have been, there was no intersection. The tunnel just kept going, sloping downward at about a 15-degree angle. "Huh," Ray said, running his hand along the wall. "Looks like they cut a new section before they closed. Happens sometimes. Company decides to explore a new scene, starts cutting, then goes bankrupt before they update the maps." That made sense. Mining companies in the 80s weren't always great about documentation, especially small operations that were struggling financially. If they'd started a new exploration tunnel and then shut down before it went into production, it might not have made it onto the official maps. Angela marked the continuation of the tunnel on her copy of the survey and made a note that we'd need to document this whole section. We moved forward, following the downward slope. The tunnel continued for another 200 feet before splitting into 3 separate passages, all of them unmarked and unmapped. The passages were rougher than the main tunnel, less finished, with exposed rock faces that still showed blast patterns from where they'd been carved out. "Definitely exploration cuts," Ray said, examining the walls. "They were probably following a seam, seeing if it was worth developing." We chose the middle passage, which seemed the most structurally sound, and followed it down. The slope got steeper here, maybe 20 degrees, and the ceiling lowered to about 8 feet. We had to duck around some of the support timbers. That's when I first noticed the smell. "You guys smell that?" I asked, stopping. Angela and Ray both paused, sniffing the air. "Yeah," Angela said slowly. "What is that?" It wasn't the usual mine smell of damp stone and old timber. This was something organic, something sweet and rotten, like meat that's been left out in the sun for too long. It made my stomach turn. Angela checked her air quality monitor, frowning. "I'm not getting any readings that would explain it. Oxygen's normal, no methane, no carbon monoxide, no hydrogen sulfide. Whatever's causing that smell, it's not showing up on the sensors." "Probably a dead animal," Ray said. deer or coyote that fell in through a ventilation shaft somewhere up top, bodies decomposing down here in the damp. That made sense, so we kept going. The smell got stronger as we descended, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, maybe 40 feet across and 20 feet high. It was roughly circular, with a domed ceiling that looked like it had been carved by hand rather than blasted. Our headlamps couldn't reach the far wall at first, and as we swept them around the chamber, I saw something that made me stop dead. There were marks on the walls, not tool marks from picks or drills, and not blast patterns from explosives. These were scratches. Long, deep gouges in the stone, running in parallel lines like something with multiple fingers had dragged them along as it moved. The scratches were everywhere, covering the walls from floor to ceiling in overlapping patterns. "What the hell?" Ray muttered, walking closer to examine them. He ran his fingers along one of the grooves. "These are deep, real deep. Whatever made these had to be strong as hell." Angela pulled out her camera and started documenting, taking photos from multiple angles. "Could be from when they were mining," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe some kind of specialized equipment we're not familiar with." I'd worked in enough mines to know what equipment marks looked like. Continuous miners left distinct circular patterns. Hand tools left regular, repeated marks. Explosives left rough, fractured surfaces. These scratches were none of those things. They were organic, irregular, made by something that didn't move in straight lines. We continued across the chamber toward the far side, where the passage continued even deeper, and that's where we found the first helmet. It was lying on its side against the tunnel wall, partially hidden behind a fallen support timber. Angela was the one who spotted it, and when she picked it up, we all saw the condition it was in. It was old, probably from the 70s or early 80s based on the style. One of those basic hard hats with a carbide lamp mount on the front and a leather suspension system inside, but the back of it was caved in. Not cracked or broken from a rock fall, but crushed inward like something had squeezed it with incredible force. Inside the helmet, on a strip of tape stuck to the suspension, was a name. J. Morrison, Shift 4. "Jesus," Ray said quietly. "Poor bastard must have had an accident down here." Angela set the helmet down carefully and made a note on her clipboard. "We need to report this when we get back up. There might be remains down here that need to be recovered." We should have turned around right then. That's what the safety protocol said. If you find evidence of an accident or death, you halt the survey and report it immediately. Let the authorities handle it. Let them bring in recovery teams and investigators. But we were already pretty deep in. Our shift still had 3 hours left, and I think we all felt like we'd be wasting time if we turned back over one old helmet. The mine had been closed for 26 years. Whoever Jay Morrison was, he'd been dead for decades. A few more hours wouldn't make any difference. So we kept going, and that's a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. The tunnel continued down for another 100 feet, the slope getting steeper, the ceiling getting lower. We had to crouch in some places, moving carefully to avoid hitting our heads on support timbers or protruding rock. Then we found the second helmet. This one was completely flattened, like it had been run over by heavy machinery. The metal was compressed to maybe an inch thick, and the lamp mount was bent back at a 90-degree angle. Same nameplate system, different name. K. Burris, Shift 4. 2 of them, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the confined space. From the same shift. Angela was quiet for a moment, shining her light down the continuing tunnel. The smell was almost overwhelming now, thick enough that I could taste it in the back of my throat. "Ray," she said slowly, "you remember hearing about any major accidents at Black Seam 7? Anything that would have killed multiple workers?" Ray shook his head. "Nothing that made the news, at least. But you know how it was back then. Companies would cover up accidents if they could, especially if safety violations were involved. Pay off the families, keep it quiet, avoid the fines and inspections." We found the third helmet about 50 feet later, then a fourth, then a fifth, then a sixth, all of them damaged in different ways, crushed, bent, torn in half. All of them labeled Shift 4. All of them scattered along this unmapped tunnel like breadcrumbs leading deeper into the mountain. "This doesn't make sense," Angela said, and I could hear the unease in her voice now. She was trying to maintain her professional composure, but it was cracking. If there was an accident big enough to kill this many workers, there would have been an investigation, federal inspectors, MSHA reports, media coverage, something, unless it wasn't an accident. I said before I could stop myself. They both looked at me. In the beam of my headlamp, their faces looked pale and strange. "What are you suggesting?" Angela asked carefully. I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't know what I was suggesting. I just knew that something about this whole situation felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. 6 workers, all from the same shift, all dead in an unmapped section of tunnel, their helmets damaged in ways that didn't match any kind of mining accident I'd ever heard of. And that smell getting stronger with every step we took deeper. We should have turned back. God, we should have turned back right then. But we didn't. We followed that tunnel deeper, past more helmets, 8 total by the time we reached the next chamber, until we came to a section where the tunnel walls changed completely. The tool marks disappeared. The blast patterns disappeared. Even the scratches disappeared. Instead, the walls became smooth. Not smooth like they'd been polished, but smooth like they'd been eroded, like water had been flowing over them for centuries, wearing away the rough edges. But there was no water down here. The tunnel was bone dry, and the smoothness wasn't random. It followed patterns, spiral patterns that curved around the walls and ceiling, drawing the eye deeper and deeper until you felt like you were falling even though you were standing still. "We need to leave," Angela said suddenly. "Right now." Her voice had changed. The professional calm was gone, replaced by raw fear. I'd worked with Angela for 3 years, and I had never heard her sound like that. Angela Ray started. "Right now," she repeated, backing away from the wall. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. We need to get out of here." That's when we heard it. A sound from deeper in the tunnel. Not a collapse or a rock fall, but something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. Long, slow inhales and exhales that echoed off the stone, getting louder. We ran. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my entire life. We sprinted back through that tunnel, past the helmets, past the scratch chamber, up the sloping passage toward the main tunnel. Our headlamps bounced wildly, throwing crazy shadows on the walls. Behind us, I could hear something moving. Something big. Something that scraped against the walls and ceiling as it came. Ray fell once, his knee slamming into the stone floor, and I hauled him back up. Angela was ahead of us, moving with desperate speed, her breathing harsh and ragged in the enclosed space. We burst out into the main tunnel and didn't stop running until we saw daylight. The entrance was maybe 300 yards away, and we covered that distance in what felt like seconds, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. When we finally made it outside, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, covered in rock dust and sweat. The service team came running over, asking what happened, but none of us could speak for a full minute. We just lay there, sucking in clean air, feeling the sun on our faces. Angela was the first to recover enough to talk. "We're sealing this mine," she said, her voice shaking. "Today, right now." She got on the radio and called the state mining board, told them there were unstable sections and potential collapse risks that made the mine too dangerous to remain open. She didn't mention what we'd found, the helmets, the scratches, the sound. She just said it needed to be sealed immediately for public safety. They sent a crew the next day with concrete and steel grating, and they sealed the entrance permanently. Poured concrete 3 feet thick, installed a steel grate over that, posted signs warning of deadly conditions inside. The official report listed Black Seam Number 7 as structurally unsound and recommended it stay closed indefinitely. But I did some research after that. I couldn't let it go. I needed to understand what we'd encountered down there. I went through old newspaper archives at the Harlan County Library, microfiche from the 80s, and I found something that made my hands shake so badly I could barely turn the pages. In August of 1985, about 4 months before Black Seam Number 7 closed permanently, there was a brief news story buried in the back of the Harlan Daily Enterprise. The headline read, "8 miners missing after failed to surface." The article said that 8 men working shift 4 had gone down for their regular rotation one night and never came back up. The mine company claimed there must have been a collapse in one of the working areas, that the men were likely dead and their bodies were unrecoverable. The article listed their names. Jay Morrison was one of them. So was Kay Burris. So were the names I'd seen on the other 6 helmets. But the strange thing, the thing that made me close the microfiche reader and sit there in the quiet library with my heart pounding, was that the article listed 8 men as missing, not 7, 8. We'd only found 7 helmets, which meant one of them had made it deeper than the others. One of them had made it past all those scattered helmets, past the scratched chamber, past the spiral patterns on the walls. One of them had made it all the way to whatever was making those sounds in the deep dark. And I think that one might still be down there. I don't work in mine reclamation anymore. I got a job doing safety inspections for above ground operations only. Strip mines, quarries, surface preparation plants. The pay's not quite as good, but I sleep better at night. And I never go underground. Not for any reason. Not for any amount of money. Angela transferred to a different department, working from an office in Frankfurt doing paperwork and permit reviews. Ray retired that same year, moved to Florida to be near his daughter. Last I heard, he'd taken up fishing and never wanted to see another mine as long as he lived. We don't talk about what happened. We made an unspoken agreement to never discuss it, to never acknowledge what we heard in that tunnel. Sometimes I think about reaching out to them, about calling Angela or Ray and asking if they still think about it, if they still hear those sounds in their dreams. But I never do, because I know they do. I know they wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, listening to the darkness, wondering if that thing is still down there in the sealed mine, still breathing in the blackness, still waiting. Some mines aren't abandoned because they're empty. Some are sealed because of what's still down there, waiting in the deep cuts where the maps stop making sense. And Black Seam Number 7 should stay sealed, should stay dark, should stay forgotten. But sometimes I think about that 8th miner, the one whose helmet we never found, and I wonder if he's still down there in some way, if he made it to the source of that breathing, if he found what lived in the spiral room, and if what lives down there now wears him the way it wore Jay Morrison's helmet, carefully, deliberately, like a trophy. If you're ever surveying in the mountains and you find a cairn that's not on any map, you document it and you move on. You don't take it apart to see how it's built. You don't add stones to it. And you absolutely don't follow the line if there's more than one. I wish someone had told me that before I spent 3 weeks in the Nantahala National Forest in the summer of 2009. I was working for a firm called Highlands Land Survey out of Asheville, North Carolina, doing boundary surveys for the Forest Service. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly hiking into remote areas with a GPS unit and surveying equipment, marking property lines, recording coordinates, making sure the government maps matched up with the actual terrain. But it paid $55,000 a year plus per diem, and I got to spend most of my time outside instead of stuck in an office, which suited me just fine. I'd been doing survey work for about 6 years at that point, ever since I graduated from Appalachian State with a degree in land surveying and geomatics. Started out doing residential work, subdivisions, property disputes, easement surveys, but I got bored with that pretty quickly. Too much time dealing with angry homeowners arguing over fence lines and too little time actually out in the field. So when the Forest Service contract came up, I jumped at it. The work was solitary, which I preferred. Most surveyors I knew liked working in teams, but I found I worked better alone. I could move at my own pace, take breaks when I wanted, camp where I wanted, and there was something peaceful about being deep in the mountains with nothing but trees and sky and the occasional deer or black bear for company. The area they sent me to was in Graham County, about 15 miles south of the Tennessee border. Dense forest, steep terrain, lots of laurel thickets, and rhododendron hells that made passage difficult. The specific boundary I was surveying ran along a ridgeline that separated national forest land from a private timber tract that had been in the same family since the 1800s. The family's name was Whitfield, and according to the historical records, they'd owned this land since before the Civil War. The patriarch, a man named Samuel Whitfield, had bought up thousands of acres in the 1830s and built a small logging empire. His descendants still owned about 2,000 acres, though they'd sold most of the valuable timber off decades ago and now just held onto the land for tax purposes and family legacy. My job was to verify the boundary between the Whitfield property and the national forest. The old survey markers were supposedly still there, brass caps set in concrete, most of them placed back in the 1960s when the Forest Service was expanding in this part of North Carolina. I needed to find each marker, verify its position with GPS, and add new markers where gaps existed in the boundary line. I drove up from Asheville on a Sunday afternoon in early June, my truck loaded with camping gear, survey equipment, food, and water for 5 days. The forest road that led to my access point was barely maintained, more of a logging trace than an actual road, and I had to engage four-wheel drive for the last 3 miles. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was late afternoon, and the shadows were getting long. I set up a base camp near a creek, about a quarter mile from the ridgeline, in a flat spot surrounded by hemlock trees, got my tent up, organized my gear, filtered some water from the creek. Then I ate a quick dinner of freeze-dried chili and turned in early. The plan was to start surveying at first light. The first 2 days went exactly according to plan. I hiked up to the ridgeline, found the old survey markers right where they were supposed to be, verified their positions with my GPS unit. The work was straightforward, almost meditative. Walk the boundary line, mark each survey point, record the data, move on to the next point. The weather was perfect, mid-70s during the day, cool at night, with a light breeze that kept the bugs down. The forest was beautiful, all mountain laurel in bloom, and oak trees so thick they blocked out most of the sun. I saw a black bear on the second day, a big male, but he lumbered off when he caught my scent. On the third day, I found the first cairn. It was about 4 feet tall, made from stacked river stones that definitely weren't native to the ridgeline. River stones are smooth and rounded from years of water tumbling them around. The ridgeline was all angular mountain stone, sharp edges and rough faces. Someone had carried these stones up from the creek valley below, maybe 200 vertical feet, and stacked them in a careful spiral pattern. The cairn sat right on the property boundary line, about 20 feet from where a survey marker should have been according to my maps. I circled around it, taking photos from multiple angles, marking its position on my GPS. It was clearly man-made, clearly deliberate, but it wasn't on any of my maps or in the Forest Service records. Hikers build cairns all the time, I told myself. Trail markers, memorials, or just for the hell of it. Probably some ambitious backpacker with too much time on their hands had decided to build a monument to themselves. But something about it bothered me. The construction was too precise, too deliberate. Each stone was placed with care, the spiral pattern perfect, and the stones were heavy. I tested one of the middle stones, and it had to weigh at least 15 or 20 pounds. Someone had put real effort into hauling them up here and stacking them just so. I documented it and moved on. A quarter mile later, I found the second cairn. Same construction, same spiral pattern, same type of river stones. This one was slightly taller, maybe 4.5 feet, then a third, then a fourth. By the end of that day, I documented 12 cairns, all of them spaced at roughly equal intervals along the boundary line. None of them appeared on any of my maps or in the Forest Service records, and all of them were built with the same spiral pattern, always turning clockwise from bottom to top. That night, back at my camp, I called my supervisor on the sat phone. His name was Derek Chen, and he'd been running survey crews for the Forest Service for about 15 years. I figured if anyone would know about the cairns, it'd be him. Cairns? He said when I described what I'd found. On the ridgeline? Yeah, I said. 12 of them so far. All identical construction, all made from river stones that someone carried up from below. They're not on any of the maps. Derek was quiet for a moment. Probably just some hiker with too much time. He said finally, document them, mark them on your survey, and otherwise ignore them. They're not relevant to the boundary verification. That's what I should have done. That's exactly what I should have done. But I couldn't ignore them. Something about the pattern, the spacing, the precision, it felt intentional. It felt like they meant something, like they were marking something important. The next morning, instead of continuing along the property line, I decided to investigate further. I started looking for more cairns in the surrounding forest, ranging out from the ridgeline in widening circles. And I found them. Dozens of them, arranged in lines that radiated out from the ridgeline like spokes on a wheel. Some were tall, some were short, but all of them had that same spiral pattern. All of them were made from river stones that had been carried up from below. I spent most of the day following one of these lines, marking each cairn on my GPS and taking photos. The line led me down off the ridge into a narrow valley, thick with hemlock and rhododendron. The cairns continued, one every 100 yards or so, getting progressively smaller as the line went on. The valley felt different from the ridgeline, darker, quieter. The hemlocks grew so thick that almost no light reached the forest floor, and the rhododendron formed impenetrable thickets on either side of a narrow game trail I was following. I could hear water somewhere nearby, probably a tributary of the creek I'd camped by, but I couldn't see it through the vegetation. The cairns led me deeper into the valley, following the contour of the land as it descended. I checked my GPS periodically to make sure I could find my way back out, but I was focused on following the line, on seeing where it led. And then the cairn stopped. The last one was different from all the others. It was much larger, maybe 7 feet tall, and built in a different pattern. Instead of a spiral, the stones were arranged in horizontal layers, each layer slightly smaller than the one below it, creating a stepped pyramid effect. And between some of the layers, there were objects. I could see bits of fabric, rotted and stained, but still recognizable, pieces of rusted metal that looked like old tools or hardware, and what looked unmistakably like bones. I should have turned back right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get back to the ridgeline and finish my survey and forget I'd ever seen these cairns. This wasn't my job. This wasn't what I'd been hired to do. But I was curious. I needed to understand what this was, why someone had built it out here in this forgotten valley. So I started taking the big cairn apart. The stones came away easily, and as I removed them, I could see more clearly what was layered inside. There was cloth looked like cotton or linen, rotted to the point where it fell apart when I touched it. There were bones, definitely animal, maybe deer or bear based on the size. There were pieces of rusted metal, looked like old farm implements, a broken axe head, some kind of saw blade, and there were photographs. They were old, the kind printed on thick cardstock with a matte finish. The images were faded almost to white, but I could still make out faces. People in old-fashioned clothes, women in long dresses, men in work shirts and suspenders standing in groups, staring at the camera with serious expressions. One photo showed a family, maybe 10 or 12 people, ranging from elderly to children, all standing in front of a rough wooden structure that might have been a barn or a cabin. I turned one of the photos over, and on the back, in handwriting so faded I could barely read it, were the words, Denton family, 1924. Denton. That name was familiar. I'd seen it somewhere in the survey records, or maybe in the historical files about the Whitfield property. I was so focused on the photographs that I didn't notice the sound at first. It started quiet, almost below the threshold of hearing a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then it got louder, rising in pitch until it was almost painful, like tinnitus but deeper, resonating in my chest. I dropped the photos and looked around, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing, just trees and undergrowth and that god-awful humming that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. Then the humming stopped, and I heard footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the valley, moving fast, crunching through dead leaves and snapping branches. Heavy footsteps, like something big moving without any attempt at stealth, and they were getting closer. I grabbed my backpack and started moving away from the cairn, back toward the ridgeline. But I had only gone maybe 20 feet when I heard more footsteps, these ones coming from a different direction, then more from another direction. They were surrounding me. I ran. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I know I crashed through the undergrowth, tearing my clothes on thorns, slipping on wet leaves, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from those footsteps. I know I lost my GPS unit at some point, dropped it while climbing over a fallen tree. I know the footsteps followed me for what felt like miles, always just out of sight, always getting closer. At some point, I must have gotten turned around, because I ended up in a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The terrain was wrong, too steep, too rocky. The vegetation was different, more open, less rhododendron, and I couldn't hear the creek anymore. I was completely lost. I kept moving, driven by panic and adrenaline, until I couldn't run anymore. Then I walked. Then I stumbled. By the time the sun started to set, I was exhausted, disoriented, and terrified. I found a spot between two large boulders and wedged myself into it, pulling my pack in after me. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it was better than being out in the open. I pulled out my flashlight and my knife and sat there in the growing darkness, listening. The footsteps had stopped at some point. I couldn't say exactly when, but the forest was quiet now. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just silence. I sat there all night, too scared to move, too wired to sleep. Every sound made me jump the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. I kept my flashlight off to save the batteries, sitting in complete darkness, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I was stiff and sore and so thirsty I could barely swallow. I drank the last of my water and tried to get my bearings. Without my GPS, I had to rely on the old-fashioned methods: moss growing on the north side of trees, the angle of the sun, the flow of water downhill. It took me most of the day, but I eventually found a creek and followed it downstream. The creek led me to a fire road, and the fire road led me to a highway. By the time I flagged down a passing truck, it was late afternoon and I'd been missing for almost 24 hours. The driver was an older man, a local, who took one look at me and asked if I needed a hospital. I told him I just needed a ride to my truck, gave him directions to the forest road where I'd parked. He didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. When I got back to my camp, I packed up as fast as I could and left, didn't even bother breaking down the tent properly, just threw everything in the truck and drove out of there, leaving tire tracks in the soft earth. I called Derek that night from a motel in Asheville and told him I'd completed the boundary survey. It was a lie. I'd only made it about halfway through before finding those cairns, but I couldn't go back there. I just couldn't. Derek didn't question it. He said to send him what data I had and he'd fill in the gaps with older survey records. The Whitfield boundary wasn't that critical anyway, he said. Just a routine verification. But I couldn't let it go completely. I needed to understand what I had encountered out there. I spent the next week doing research. I went through county records, historical society archives, old newspapers, anything I could find about Graham County and the Nantahala area. And I found something that made my blood run cold. In the winter of 1924, an entire family disappeared from their homestead in what's now the national forest. The Denton family, Isaiah Denton, his wife Martha, their 4 children ranging in age from 3 to 14, and Isaiah's parents who lived with them, 8 people total. They were there one day, gone the next. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, no blood. The cabin was neat and tidy, with food still on the table and a fire still burning in the hearth. But the family was gone. A search was organized, involving maybe 50 people from nearby communities. They searched for weeks, covering hundreds of acres of forest, and they found nothing. No bodies, no tracks, no evidence of where the Dentons had gone or what had happened to them. The case was never solved, but one of the search crew members, a man named Robert Hayes, gave a statement to the sheriff that was recorded in the official file. I found a copy of it in the Graham County Historical Society archives. Hayes said that during the search, they'd found strange markers in the woods near the Denton property, piles of stacked stones arranged in patterns. He said the markers gave him a bad feeling, made his skin crawl, and he recommended they stop searching that area and focus elsewhere. The sheriff had dismissed his concerns and ordered the search to continue, but they never found the Dentons. Hayes went on to say that he'd gone back to the area years later, in the early 30s, and found more stone markers. They'd multiplied, he said, spreading through the forest like a disease. He said the stones were arranged in lines and circles and patterns that hurt to look at for too long. He said he'd followed one of the lines to its end and found a large cairn with unnatural things inside it. The report ended there, with a note from the sheriff saying Hayes' statement was unreliable due to superstitious nature. I think about that photograph I found, the one labeled Denton family, 1924. I think about how it was layered inside that cairn, with the bones and the fabric and the rusted metal. And I think about those footsteps in the valley, circling around me, always just out of sight. What happened to the Dentons? Where did they go? And who or what built those cairns to mark their passing? I don't do backcountry surveys anymore. I work in town now, doing residential property lines and subdivision layouts. The pay's actually better, the hours are regular, and I never have to spend a night alone in the woods. And if anyone ever asks me about Graham County or the Nantahala Forest, I tell them it's beautiful country, great hiking, great fishing, great scenery. What I don't tell them is that some patterns are better left unread. Some stones are better left stacked. And some valleys should stay empty, no matter how curious you are about where they lead. Because the people who built those cairns weren't marking a trail. They weren't commemorating anything. They weren't leaving messages for future hikers. They were marking a boundary. And boundaries exist for a reason. They're warnings, telling you there's something on the other side that you don't want to encounter. Something that's been there longer than the trees, longer than the mountains, longer than any human settlement. Something that takes people sometimes, when they wander too far into its territory, takes them and adds them to the cairns, layer by layer, stone by stone. I still have nightmares about those footsteps, about the sound of something heavy moving through the forest, circling, hunting, and I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear that humming sound, that resonance that made my teeth ache and my chest hurt. But I'm safe here in Asheville, in my small apartment with its deadbolts and security system. I'm safe from whatever lives in that valley, whatever builds those spiral cairns and hunts in the rhododendron hells. At least, that's what I tell myself. Because sometimes, when I'm walking through town or driving on the highway, I see them. Cairns. Small ones. Just 3 or 4 stones stacked on top of each other. All on the side of the road, in parking lots, in the park near my apartment. And I don't know if they were always there and I just never noticed them before, or if they're following me. If whatever I disturbed in that valley is marking a new trail, one that leads from the forest to the city, from the wilderness to civilization, one that leads right to my door. I try not to think about it. I try to tell myself it's just coincidence, just pattern-seeking behavior, just paranoia left over from that day in the forest. But I can't help counting them, the cairns I see around town, and every day there seem to be more. So if you're ever in Asheville and you see a man avoiding small piles of stacked stones crossing the street to get away from them, that's probably me. And if you're ever surveying in the mountains and you find cairns that aren't on any map, you remember what I said at the beginning. Document them from a distance. Don't take them apart. Don't follow the lines. And most importantly, don't disturb what's buried inside them. Because some things want to stay buried and some things don't want to be found. But once you've found them, once you've seen what they are, they might just decide to find you instead. When you're doing search and rescue in the Smokies and you find a hiker's clothes folded neatly on the trail, you call it in immediately. You don't touch them. You don't investigate alone. And you absolutely don't follow the footprints leading away from them. I learned this the hard way in October of 2015 during my third year as a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The call came in on a Friday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to drop behind the western ridges and that golden autumn light was filtering through the trees. I was finishing up some paperwork at the Sugarlands Visitor Center when dispatch radioed that we had a missing hiker on the Alum Cave Trail, a man named Derek Hoffman, age 32, from Columbus, Ohio, had failed to return from a day hike. His girlfriend had reported him missing when he didn't show up at their hotel in Gatlinburg by sunset. According to the girlfriend, Derek had left that morning around 8 a.m. with a small day pack, 2 bottles of water, some trail mix, and his phone. He planned to do the 5-mile round trip to Alum Cave Bluffs and back, a popular hike, well-maintained, heavily trafficked, clearly marked. He was an experienced hiker, had done trails all over Ohio and West Virginia, and he told his girlfriend he'd be back by 2 p.m. at the latest. But it was now 6:30 p.m., and Derek's phone was going straight to voicemail. No answer, no text messages, nothing. I'd been a ranger for 3 years at that point, and missing hiker calls weren't unusual. We'd get maybe 50 or 60 a year, people who got lost, people who underestimated the difficulty of a trail, people who had medical emergencies. Most of the time, we'd find them within a few hours, dehydrated or embarrassed or nursing a twisted ankle, but otherwise fine. But there was something about this call that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the time of day. Starting a search with night coming on is never ideal. Maybe it was the location. Alum Cave Trail is not a hard hike to navigate. Or maybe it was just instinct, a little voice in the back of your head that says something's wrong. We organized a search party that evening. 4 rangers, including myself, plus 2 volunteers from the local search and rescue team. The plan was standard hike up to the bluffs with flashlights and thermal imaging equipment, check all the obvious places where someone might have gotten injured or lost, and if we didn't find him by midnight, we'd bring in more resources. The next morning, I was partnered with another ranger named Marcus Webb. Marcus had been working in the park for almost 15 years and had probably done 100 search and rescue operations. He was in his mid-40s, built like a linebacker, with a calm, methodical way of approaching emergencies that I had learned a lot from over the years. If you had to be lost in the woods, Marcus was the guy you wanted looking for you. We started up the trail around 7:30 p.m., with the last of the daylight fading behind the ridgeline. The Alum Cave Trail starts at the Alum Cave Trailhead on Newfound Gap Road, winding through a hemlock forest before crossing Alum Cave Creek on a footbridge. From there, it climbs steadily through pine and hardwood forest, passing several scenic spots before reaching the bluffs about 2.5 miles up. It's a beautiful hike in daylight, but at night, with just our headlamps cutting through the darkness, it felt different. The forest closed in around us, shadows moving in ways that made you look twice. The sound of the creek below was louder in the dark, a constant white noise that made it hard to hear anything else. We made good time, moving quickly but carefully, calling Derek's name every few minutes. Marcus would yell, Derek Hoffman, Park Rangers, if you can hear us, call out. Then we'd stop and listen, waiting for a response that never came. We made it about 2 miles up the trail, maybe 3/4 of the way to the bluffs, when Marcus stopped suddenly and held up his hand. You see that? He said, pointing his light off to the left side of the trail. I followed his beam and felt my stomach drop. There was a pile of clothes on a flat rock about 10 feet off the trail, not scattered or thrown aside, but folded, neatly folded and stacked, with a pair of hiking boots placed carefully beside them. Jesus, I said quietly. Marcus was already on the radio, calling it in to Incident Command. While he talked, I moved closer to examine the clothes, being careful not to touch anything. There was a blue fleece jacket on the bottom, then a gray t-shirt with the Columbus Marathon logo, then a pair of cargo pants. The clothes looked fresh, not wet or weathered. They'd been placed there deliberately, arranged with care. Derek's girlfriend had described what he was wearing when he left that morning. Blue fleece jacket, gray shirt, cargo pants. This was his stuff. Marcus, I called, keeping my voice level. We got tracks. He finished his radio call and came over. I pointed my light at the ground near the rock. There were footprints in the soft earth, leading away from the clothes and heading upslope into the dense forest. Bare footprints, human-sized, pressed deep into the dirt. Marcus examined them with his flashlight, his jaw tight. Barefoot, he said, heading uphill, away from the trail. That didn't make sense. If Derek had gotten disoriented or injured, why would he take off all his clothes? And why would he head upslope, away from the clear, marked trail that led back to the parking area? Could be hypothermia, Marcus said, though he didn't sound convinced. People get paradoxical undressing in the late stages. They feel hot when they're actually freezing, start taking off their clothes. But it's only about 50 degrees. Would that be cold enough? If he's wet, maybe, I said. Fell in the creek, got soaked, started getting hypothermic as the sun went down. It was the best explanation we had, so we decided to follow the tracks. The protocol in a situation like this was to call in and wait for additional units, but if Derek was hypothermic and wandering around barefoot in the forest at night, every minute counted. We could follow the tracks and radio our position as we went. Marcus notified Incident Command of our plan, and we started up the slope. The tracks led us away from the trail, zigzagging between trees in no particular pattern. Sometimes they'd be clear and deep. Other times they'd disappear on patches of exposed rock or dense leaf litter. We'd lose them and then pick them up again a few yards later. We followed them for maybe 200 yards, climbing steadily through the dark forest. Our headlamps bounced over roots and rocks and ferns, creating a small circle of light in an ocean of darkness. The sounds of the trail, other hikers, the creek, distant voices faded away until there was nothing but our breathing and the crunch of our boots on dry leaves. Then the tracks just stopped. We were in a small clearing, maybe 15 feet across, surrounded by young oak trees. The ground was relatively clear, covered in a thin layer of leaves. And right in the middle of the clearing, the footprints just ended, not at a creek or a cliff or any obvious landmark. They just terminated mid-stride, as if Derek had been plucked off the ground mid-step. What the hell? Marcus said, sweeping his light around in a circle. We searched the immediate area, looking for any indication of where he might have gone, but there was nothing. No more tracks, no disturbed leaves, no broken branches. The footprints just stopped in the middle of that clearing like he'd vanished into thin air. That's when I saw the second set of clothes. They were about 30 feet away, further up the slope, on another flat rock. Same arrangement, jacket, shirt, pants, boots beside them. But these were different clothes. A red windbreaker, a black long-sleeve shirt, khaki pants. Marcus, I called, my voice cracking slightly. He came over, and we both stood there, staring at the second pile. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. We need backup, Marcus said finally. Right now. He got on the radio while I examined the second pile more closely. The clothes were fresh, like they'd been placed there recently. Next to the boots was a wallet. I used a stick to flip it open, careful not to contaminate any potential evidence. The driver's license inside showed a young woman with long dark hair and a bright smile. The name on the license was Sarah Chen, age 28, from Seattle, Washington. Marcus, I said, this is recent. License expires in 2017. He stopped mid-sentence on the radio and looked over. What? I showed him the license, and I watched the color drain from his face. These clothes can't have been here long, I said. They're not weathered, not faded, and this license is current. We both looked upslope, where our lights barely penetrated the dense forest. Somewhere up there, potentially, were two missing hikers, both of them barefoot, both of them having stripped off their clothes in identical fashion. The incident commander came back on the radio, telling us to hold position and wait for additional units. They were scrambling a full search team, bringing in thermal imaging from a helicopter, the whole works. ETA was 40 minutes, but as we stood there in the dark, waiting, I started noticing other things that made my skin crawl. There were more footprints, not just leading away from the two piles of clothes, but everywhere, dozens of them, crisscrossing through the forest in random patterns. All barefoot, all human-sized, all pressed deep into the earth like they'd been made by someone walking with unusual weight or force. And the forest was too quiet. No insects, no birds, no small animal sounds, just silence and the sound of our breathing and the distant rustle of wind in the trees. You hear that? Marcus whispered. I nodded, because I did hear it. Something moving upslope, not the rustle of leaves or crack of branches, actual footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps getting closer. Marcus's hand moved to the canister of bear spray on his belt. I did the same, my heart starting to pound. The footsteps continued, and then I saw it, a figure moving between the trees, about 50 yards upslope. It was hard to make out in the darkness, but it looked human. Roughly the right size and shape, moving upright on two legs. Hello, Marcus called out. This is the National Park Service. If you need help, call out. The figure stopped. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then it started moving again, coming down the slope toward us. Not walking exactly, but a strange, lurching gait, arms swinging at odd angles, legs moving stiffly. Sir, are you okay? Marcus called. Do you need medical assistance? The figure kept coming, and as it got closer, I could see it more clearly in our flashlight beams. It was a man, middle-aged, maybe 45 or 50, completely naked. His skin was pale, almost gray in the artificial light, and there were scratches and cuts all over his arms and legs like he'd been running through thorny bushes. His eyes were wrong. They didn't blink. They didn't react to our lights. They just stared, fixed and glassy, as he lurched toward us. Sir, stop right there, Marcus said, his voice harder now, more commanding. Stop and identify yourself. The man didn't stop. He was maybe 20 feet away now, close enough that I could hear his breathing. It was wet, rasping, like fluid in his lungs. That's when I saw what he was wearing around his neck. There was a lanyard with an ID badge, the kind Park Service employees wear. The photo on the badge showed a young ranger, smiling, with the name Robert Hayes printed below. I knew that name. Robert Hayes had been a ranger at the park in the early 2000s. He'd disappeared during a solo patrol in 2004. They'd found his truck at a trailhead on the Tennessee side, found his radio and his pack in the woods nearby, but they'd never found him. That had been 11 years ago. Marcus, I said, backing away. We need to go. Now. Marcus must have seen the ID too, or maybe he just trusted my instinct, because he didn't argue. We both turned and started moving quickly back down the slope toward the trail. Behind us, I could hear more footsteps. Not just one set, but many. The whole forest seemed to be moving, converging on our position. We ran. Our headlamps bounced wildly as we crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, roots trying to trip us. I could hear Marcus's radio crackling with calls from Incident Command asking for our position, but he didn't stop to respond. We just ran. We made it back to the trail and started running downhill, our boots pounding on the packed dirt. I could hear them behind us, those lurching footsteps, always just out of sight, but getting closer. We ran for what felt like miles, but was probably only about half a mile, not stopping until we saw the lights of the other search team coming up the trail toward us. When we finally stopped, gasping for air, I looked back up the trail. Nothing. The forest was empty and quiet. The incident commander wanted to know what happened, why we'd broken protocol and run. Marcus told him we'd encountered something dangerous and needed to regroup. He didn't specify what. They called off the search that night and resumed the next morning with a full team, 20 rangers, search dogs, helicopter support with thermal imaging, the whole 9 yards. They found Derek Hoffman's body 3 days later, about a mile off the trail in a ravine, lying face down in a shallow creek. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as hypothermia. They found Sarah Chen a day after that in almost the same condition, about 200 yards from where Derek was found. What they didn't find was Robert Hayes, and they didn't find the piles of clothes Marcus and I had seen, even though we gave them exact GPS coordinates. The rocks were there, but the clothes were gone. The official report listed both deaths as accidental. 2 hikers who'd gotten disoriented in separate incidents developed hypothermia from getting wet in the creek and succumbed to the elements. Tragic, but explainable. What the report didn't mention was that both bodies were found without their clothes, and both had been dead for less than 24 hours, even though Sarah Chen had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier from a completely different trail on the opposite side of the park. What the report didn't mention was the condition of the bodies, the scratches and cuts that covered them, the way their eyes were open, fixed, glassy, the way they looked like they died while walking, frozen mid-stride. And what the report definitely didn't mention was what Marcus found when he went back to that section of trail a week later during the day with 3 other rangers for backup. He told me about it over beers one night after we both had a few too many. Said he'd gone back to try to make sense of what we'd seen, to prove to himself it had been real and not just some panic-induced hallucination. He found more clothes. 7 more piles, all of them arranged the same way, all of them on rocks slightly off the trail. Different sizes, different styles, different colors. Men's clothes, women's clothes, even a pile that looked like it had belonged to a teenager. And near each pile, he found ID. Driver's licenses, park passes, credit cards, all of them belonging to people who'd gone missing in the park over the past 15 years. Marcus photographed everything, documented it all, brought it to the park superintendent, and the superintendent told him to lose the photos, to forget what he'd seen, and to never speak of it again. Said the park couldn't handle the publicity, couldn't handle the lawsuits, couldn't handle the truth. So Marcus retired, took early retirement, moved to Florida to be near his daughter. Last I heard, he'd taken up fishing and never wanted to see another mountain as long as he lived. I transferred to a different park the next year, told them I wanted to be closer to family, wanted a change of scenery, wanted to work somewhere flatter. They didn't ask questions. There was a job opening at Everglades National Park, and I took it. I don't work in the mountains anymore. Don't hike for recreation, don't go camping, don't even like being in the woods after dark. But I still think about that night, about those piles of clothes and those barefoot tracks and that thing wearing Robert Hayes' ID badge. I think about Derek Hoffman and Sarah Chen, about how they were found in the same area even though they'd gone missing weeks apart on different trails. I think about all those other piles of clothes Marcus found, all those IDs belonging to missing hikers. And I think about what must have happened to them, what must still be happening to people who wander off the marked trails. Because here's what I believe. Those people didn't die of hypothermia. They didn't get lost. They didn't have accidents. They got taken by something that walks on 2 legs but isn't human. something that strips people of their clothes and their identities and makes them walk the forest at night, lurching between the trees, hunting for others to join them. And the Park Service knows. They have to know. Marcus isn't the first ranger to find evidence, and he won't be the last. But they can't tell the truth, because who would believe it? And even if they did believe it, who would want to visit a national park where people get transformed into shambling things that hunt in the darkness? So they bury it. They call the deaths hypothermia or exposure or accidents. They file the reports and seal the evidence and tell people like Marcus to retire quietly and never speak of what they've seen. I got a call from Marcus last month. First time I'd heard from him in almost a year. He didn't say hello or ask how I was doing. He just said, "It's spreading." I asked him what he meant. "The clothes," he said. "They're not just in the Smokies anymore. I've got friends, other retired rangers. They're reporting the same thing. Shenandoah, Cherokee, Nantahala, hikers going missing, bodies found in the wrong places, clothes folded on rocks. It's spreading." I didn't know what to say to that. "How many parks?" I asked finally. "At least 6 that I know of," Marcus said. "Probably more. And it's not just parks. I got a call from a buddy who works for the Forest Service in West Virginia. They're finding them on public land too. Anywhere people hike alone, anywhere the trails go deep into the woods. "What do we do?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. "I honestly don't know, but I think it's too late to stop it. I think all we can do is warn people, tell them not to hike alone, tell them to stay on marked trails, tell them to get out before dark." He paused, and I could hear him take a drink of something. "And tell them if they ever see clothes folded on a rock, they run. They don't investigate, they don't call it in, they just run, and they don't stop running until they see other people." We talked for a few more minutes, then he hung up. I haven't heard from him since. But I think about what he said, about it spreading, and I think about all those parks I used to love, all those trails I used to hike, and I wonder how many of them are infected now, how many of them have things lurching through the trees at night, wearing the faces and names of people who used to be human. If you're reading this and you hike in the Appalachians or the Smokies or any of the mountain parks, you remember what I said at the beginning. If you find clothes folded on a rock, you call it in and you leave. You don't touch them. You don't investigate. And you absolutely don't follow any footprints. Because some of the missing hikers aren't missing at all. They're still out there walking the trails at night, looking for company. And if you're not careful, if you wander off the marked path, if you find yourself alone in the woods as the sun goes down, you might just become one of them. Folded clothes on a rock, barefoot tracks leading into the darkness, and then nothing but walking, forever walking, in the cold and the dark, with empty eyes and borrowed names. That's what waits in the deep woods. That's what the Park Service doesn't want you to know. So stay on the trails, stay with your group, and get out before the sun goes down. Because the things that hunt in the Smokies don't need to eat, they don't need to sleep, they just need company, and they're always looking for more. If you're tracking wildlife in Appalachia and you find deer carcasses arranged in geometric patterns, you document it from a distance and you leave. You don't examine the bodies, you don't measure the pattern, and you absolutely don't camp anywhere near it. I'm telling you this because I did all 3 of those things in the winter of 2013, and I saw something that still wakes me up screaming some nights. I was working for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources at the time, doing population surveys and health assessments for white-tailed deer in the George Washington National Forest. It's the kind of work that sounds more glamorous than it actually is, mostly hiking through remote areas in all weather, setting up trail cameras, collecting scat samples, and documenting signs of disease, or predation, but I loved it. I had a master's degree in wildlife biology from Virginia Tech and about 8 years of field experience at that point, so I thought I'd seen just about everything the forest could throw at me. Deer with chronic wasting disease stumbling in circles, bear predation sites where they'd cache to kill under dirt and leaves, coyote dens surrounded by the scattered remains of dozens of fawns. Nature is brutal and efficient, and I had learned to observe it without getting emotional about it. That's the job. You document what's there, you try to understand the patterns, and you don't anthropomorphize or project human morality onto animal behavior. But what I found in the George Washington wasn't animal behavior, at least not any kind I'd ever seen before. The assignment was straightforward enough: spend 2 weeks in a section of the forest near the West Virginia border, documenting deer populations and looking for signs of chronic wasting disease. CWD had been detected in nearby counties over the past few years, and the department was concerned it might spread into Virginia. It's a terrible disease, basically the deer equivalent of mad cow disease. Affects their brains, makes them waste away, changes their behavior. Infected deer stop eating, lose their fear of humans, stumble around like they're drunk, and it's 100% fatal. My job was to look for those symptoms in the wild population, set up trail cameras to monitor movement patterns and behavior, collect scat and urine samples for testing, document any deer that looked sick or were behaving abnormally, standard wildlife health assessment protocol. I set up a base camp near a creek called Little Back Creek in a valley surrounded by steep ridges covered in oak and hickory forest. It was early February, cold but not freezing, with patches of old snow still clinging to the shaded slopes. Most of the songbirds had migrated south, and the forest had that quiet, dormant feel of deep winter. The first few days were productive. I set up 20 trail cameras in a grid pattern covering about 10 square miles, positioning them near game trails, water sources, and areas with fresh deer sign. Then I started hiking circuits, checking the cameras every few days and documenting any deer signs. I found tracks, scat, rubs on trees, where bucks had scraped the bark with their antlers. The deer population seemed healthy. I wasn't seeing any obvious signs of CWD, no abnormal behavior on the trail cameras, no emaciated deer, no animals showing the characteristic head-down posture and excessive drooling. The rut was over, and the deer were in winter mode, conserving energy, browsing on whatever vegetation they could find under the snow. On the fourth day, I found the first carcass. It was a doe, maybe 3 years old based on tooth wear, lying in a small clearing about 2 miles from my camp. I approached carefully, watching for scavengers. Sometimes you'd find a coyote or black bear still feeding on a fresh kill, and you didn't want to surprise them. But there were no scavengers, no tracks around the body except deer tracks, and as I got closer, I realized why. The deer had been completely gutted, organs removed with surgical precision, but they weren't scattered around the body like you'd expect from a predator feeding. They were arranged in a circle around the carcass, each organ placed carefully at equal intervals: heart at 12 o'clock, liver at 3 o'clock, lungs at 6 o'clock, stomach at 9 o'clock, intestines and other organs filling in the gaps between. I'd never seen anything like it. Predators don't arrange their kills. They eat, they tear, they scatter bits of carcass all over the place as they feed. Even humans poaching deer don't do this. They field dress the animal, remove the organs, and either leave them in a pile or scatter them for scavengers. This was deliberate, intentional. Someone or something had taken the time to arrange these organs in a perfect geometric pattern. I took photos from multiple angles, marked the GPS coordinates, made detailed notes about the arrangement. Then I moved on, thinking maybe it was some kind of bizarre poaching activity. People did strange things sometimes, rituals or games or just plain weirdness. I found the second carcass later that same day, about half a mile from the first. Another doe, similar age, arranged in exactly the same way, gutted, organs in a perfect circle around the body. Then I found the third and the fourth, and by the end of the day, I documented 7 deer carcasses, all within a 2-mile radius, all arranged identically. That night, I called my supervisor on the sat phone. His name was Tom Bradford, and he'd been with the department for about 20 years. I figured if anyone would know about unusual kill patterns, it'd be Tom. Arranged in circles, he said, when I described what I'd found. Like deliberately arranged? Yeah, I said. Perfect circles, same spacing every time, and the cuts are too clean for a predator. Someone's using a knife. Tom was quiet for a moment. That's weird. Maybe some kind of ritualistic hunting? There are groups that do that kind of thing, neo-pagans or whatever. Harvest the animal, arrange the organs as an offering to nature spirits or some shit. It was a possibility, I guess. There were all kinds of belief systems out there, and some of them involved animal sacrifice and ritual arrangements, but something about it felt wrong. The locations were scattered, not centralized around one ceremonial site. And why deer? Why so many? Tom told me to keep documenting and to report anything else unusual. If it was poaching, we'd need evidence to prosecute. So that's what I did. Over the next 3 days, I found 14 more carcasses, all deer, all gutted, and arranged the same way. But the pattern was evolving, getting more complex. The newest kills weren't just individual circles anymore, they were connected. Lines of organs leading from one carcass to another, linking them together in larger geometric shapes. By the 6th day, I had mapped 21 carcasses total, and when I plotted them on my GPS and connected the organ lines between them, I saw something that made my skin crawl. They formed a spiral, a perfect spiral, starting at the outer edge of my survey area and curving inward, tightening as it went, all the lines converging toward a central point near the valley floor. I spent that evening staring at the map on my GPS, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic hunting. Someone had planned this, had deliberately killed these deer in a specific order, in specific locations to create this pattern. But why? What was the point? The next morning, I followed the spiral to its center. It took me most of the day, hiking from carcass to carcass, checking each one to make sure my GPS coordinates were accurate. The spiral was perfect, mathematically perfect. The spacing between each carcass decreased at a constant rate as you moved inward, like a logarithmic spiral or a nautilus shell. And at the center, in a small clearing surrounded by bare winter trees, I found something that changed everything. It was a deer, but not like the others. This one was still alive. It was standing in the exact center of the clearing, completely motionless, not feeding, not looking around, not reacting to my approach at all. Just standing there with its head down, legs splayed slightly, making a sound I'd never heard a deer make before. It was moaning, a low, continuous moan that sounded almost human, like someone in pain, but sustained, never stopping for breath. I approached slowly, thinking maybe it was injured or sick. Deer with CWD sometimes make vocalizations, grunts, and bleats that sound wrong. Maybe this was an advanced case, an animal so far gone it had lost the ability to function normally. But as I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, I could see this wasn't a sick deer. There was no emaciation, no drooling, no loss of coordination. The animal's coat was thick and healthy. Its legs were straight and strong. It just wasn't moving at all. No breathing that I could see, no muscle tremors, no ear flicks, just that continuous, impossible moaning. Then it lifted its head and looked at me. Its eyes were wrong. Instead of the normal dark brown of white-tailed deer, they were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just blank white orbs that seemed to glow faintly in the gray winter light. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. This wasn't natural. This wasn't CWD or any other disease I'd ever studied. This was something else entirely. I started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the deer, reaching for my phone to take a photo. But before I could get my phone out, the deer's head started to rotate. Not turn, rotate, like it was on a swivel. The head rotated smoothly, impossibly, a full 180 degrees until it was facing backward. The white eyes were still looking at me, still glowing faintly, while the deer's body remained perfectly still, facing forward. That broke whatever spell was holding me there. I turned and ran, crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I just ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my legs were shaking and my lungs were burning. When I finally stopped, I was maybe a mile from the clearing, on a ridge overlooking the valley. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath and trying not to vomit from fear and exertion. What the hell had I just seen? What was that thing? I made it back to my camp around sunset, my hands still shaking. I packed up my gear immediately: tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, everything. I didn't even bother organizing it properly. I just threw it all in my truck and drove out of there, using my headlights to navigate the rough forest road. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Then I pulled over at a gas station, went inside, bought a coffee I didn't drink, and sat in my truck trying to process what had happened. The next morning, I went to Tom's office and told him I was done with the survey. I didn't give him details. I just said I had found evidence of unusual predation patterns and recommended sending a full team to investigate. I turned in my GPS data, my photos of the carcass arrangements, and my recommendation that the area be monitored more closely. Tom looked at the photos and frowned. "This is weird," he said. "Really weird. But where's the deer you saw? The live one in the center?" I told him I couldn't photograph it, that I'd been too far away and it had run off before I could get my camera out, which was a lie, but I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him what I'd really seen because he'd think I was crazy. He sent a team about a week later: 3 biologists, 2 conservation officers, and a wildlife veterinarian. They spent 4 days in that section of forest and found nothing. No carcasses, no organ patterns, no deer with white eyes, nothing. When they came back, they suggested maybe I'd been experiencing stress-induced hallucinations, or maybe I'd found some old kill sites and the scavengers had scattered the remains before the team got there. Or maybe I'd just been in the field alone too long and needed a break. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it was real. Um, I started doing research after that. I couldn't let it go. I went through old wildlife reports, forestry records, newspaper archives, and I found something that made me realize this had been happening for a long time. Every few years, going back decades, someone would report unusual deer deaths in that same area. Different biologists, different years, but always the same basic story: carcasses arranged in patterns, organs placed deliberately, something wrong with the kills. The reports never led to anywhere. Teams would investigate, find nothing, and file the reports away. But the pattern was there if you knew to look for it. I also found a memo from 1973 written by a forest ranger named Dale Tucker. He'd reported finding a congregation of deer in a clearing near Little Back Creek. He said they were standing completely still, arranged in a spiral pattern, and when he approached, they all turned to look at him at once. He described their eyes as wrong, but didn't elaborate. He never specified what he meant by wrong. Tucker never filed another report after that one. According to employment records, he transferred to a different ranger district a month later and took early retirement 2 years after that. He died in 2008, heart attack, according to the obituary. He was only 62. I tried to find more information about Tucker, tried to contact his family, but they didn't want to talk to me. His daughter hung up on me when I mentioned Littleback Creek. His son told me to stop calling and never contact them again. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever Tucker had seen out there, it had affected him for the rest of his life, and his family knew about it. They knew, and they wanted nothing to do with it. I don't work in wildlife biology anymore. I teach now at a community college in Roanoke, introduction to environmental science, wildlife management, that kind of thing. Safe, predictable, no field work required. My students sometimes ask me about my time with the Department of Wildlife Resources, and I tell them it was interesting work. I tell them about tracking bears, documenting bird populations, doing health surveys. I don't tell them about the deer. But sometimes, when we're covering predation patterns or disease ecology, a student will ask about unusual animal behavior, strange sightings, animals acting wrong, unexplained patterns in nature. And I always tell them the same thing. If you see something in the woods that doesn't make sense, something that violates the normal patterns of nature, you document it from a distance and you leave. Because some patterns aren't made by predators. Some patterns aren't made by disease. Some patterns are made by something else entirely, something that doesn't follow the rules we think govern the natural world. And if you're smart, you don't stick around to find out what that something is. I still have the photos from that survey. GPS coordinates, timestamps, measurements of the spiral pattern, 21 deer carcasses arranged in a perfect logarithmic spiral. I never showed them to Tom. I keep them on an encrypted drive in my desk drawer, along with Dale Tucker's memo and the other historical reports I found. Sometimes I think about going back, taking a team, doing a proper investigation, using drones and trail cameras and all the modern technology we have now, figuring out what the hell is happening in that valley. But then I remember those white eyes staring at me. I remember that head rotating backward, smoothly, impossibly. And I remember the sound it made, that low, continuous moan that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. So no, I'm never going back. But I do monitor the reports that come out of that area. Every few months, I check the department's database, looking for any mentions of unusual deer activity near Littleback Creek. And there are always reports. Not often, maybe once or twice a year, but they're there. Hunters reporting deer that won't run when approached. Trail camera photos of deer standing in perfect geometric formations. Hikers finding deer carcasses arranged in patterns. The reports are always investigated. Teams go out, spend a few days looking around, find nothing, and close the case. The pattern continues. Last month, I got an email from a former colleague, a biologist named Sarah, who works in the Shenandoah region. She'd heard I'd done work near Littleback Creek years ago, and she wanted to ask me about it. She'd found deer carcasses arranged in circles, said she'd mapped 12 of them so far, and they seemed to be forming some kind of pattern. She wanted to know if I'd seen anything similar. I told her to document it from a distance and leave. Don't examine the bodies closely. Don't try to find the center of the pattern. And absolutely don't go there after dark. She asked why. I told her that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some patterns are better left incomplete. She didn't email back. But 2 weeks later, I saw a news article from Virginia. A wildlife biologist had gone missing during a routine survey in Shenandoah National Park. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. They found her truck at a trailhead, found her equipment scattered in the forest, but no sign of her. They searched for 3 days before calling it off. Listed her as missing, presumed dead, probably fell and hit her head or got attacked by a bear or something equally mundane and explainable. But I know better. I know she found the center of the pattern. I know she saw what I saw, the deer that's not a deer, the white eyes that glow in the darkness, the impossible head rotation. And I know she's probably out there right now, standing in a clearing somewhere, moaning that low, continuous sound, waiting for someone else to find her. If you're reading this and you work in wildlife management or forestry or any field that takes you deep into the Appalachian forests, you remember what I said at the beginning. If you find animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns, you document it from a distance and you leave. You don't examine the bodies closely. You don't measure the pattern. You don't try to find the center. And most importantly, you don't try to understand it. Because understanding requires getting close. It requires staying. It requires letting your curiosity override your survival instinct. And that's when it gets you. That's when you become part of the pattern yourself, standing in a clearing, moaning, waiting, with wide eyes and an impossible neck, and the hunger for company that never ends. The patterns in the forest aren't random. They're not made by predators or disease or natural processes. They're made by something else, something old, something patient, something that's still arranging deer in spirals, still waiting in clearings, still calling out with borrowed voices and stolen forms. And it's always looking for more participants, more pieces to add to the pattern, more bodies to arrange in the ever-widening spiral that leads to the center, where the white-eyed thing waits. So stay away from Little Bat Creek. Stay away from the spiral patterns. Stay away from the deer that stand too still and moan too human. Because once you see it, once you understand what you're looking at, it's already too late. The pattern has already claimed you. You're just the last one to know.